Today, we're going to look at using HDR in Last Call BBS. Now, you might not know what this game is, and you might also not know that the game supports HDR, because it doesn't, but it does. And the way you enable HDR is using Special K with Perceptual Boost. And I'm going to show you how to do that in this video, and I'm going to show you what it looks like, and the difference HDR can make on an SDR 2D Zachtronics game. Let's take a look at that now. So I want to show you, this looks really good, right? And the reason this looks good is because the game engine is in DirectX 11, and because it's in DirectX 11, there are native calls to certain color values and other things like that, where Special K can get hooks into it and then create HDR. As you can see here, here's the HDR. If I click on anything here, there's a potential to spoil the game. This won't spoil it, but I do want you to understand that this game really is running in HDR. It's a 2D game. I'm pretty sure it's 2D. Most games that are 2D are actually 3D, so they work really well in HDR. They have real-time lights and everything. I don't think this is a 3D game. So I was having trouble running the game before. It was like at 80 frames a second. It's because I was recording the video, multiple video streams, and not at the right quality, and so I wanted to show you what this looks like. The game in SDR looks like this. So this is HDR, SDR. As you can see, it looks very dull, and I don't think it's a great showing of the game's strengths. Also, a CRT would have been a little bit brighter with more contrast on it, which this game is trying to emulate, because back then you would have had a cathode ray tube projecting onto or like a mask or something they call it, onto a screen of glass, and then we were behind that glass and we're seeing it kind of like a 3D view. It would look more like the HDR view. This is how I remember CRTs looking. It didn't look like it does with an LCD at all. LCDs are very different in how they produce light and display images compared to CRT. And CRTs also, see all these pixels here? You wouldn't see that on a CRT. And those are beyond this, like, here's a 2D game. I might spoil something for you by clicking on this, so if you've never played this game, don't watch anything. I've already shown you some pieces of it. Something about this game that's interesting is you spend a lot of time thinking, so you're not really like moving stuff around and doing anything, and you're leaving an image on the screen. And with an OLED, the image retention thing will kick in and prevent it's called the automatic backlight limiter, and it will kick in and limit the backlight's brightness. So when you might be looking at HDR, it'll just switch into SDR until a bunch of stuff moves around on screen, and it'll go back into HDR again and get really bright. It's really annoying, and I'm glad I don't have a TV OLED as a monitor, because I'd be experiencing that constantly, since most of my work is not gaming, it's productivity. So I'm actually working on things and thinking, and I'm not just watching videos and playing games. I can't use an OLED like that as a main display, but what I could do is use it as a secondary display, or as there are computer monitor OLEDs, and those are designed to be at full brightness all the time. It's very different, and they need like big heat sinks and other things to prevent image retention, where the pixels burn out on an OLED. That's apart from all this discussion. It's just mainly because this is a 2D game, and 2D games like this leave a lot of things on the screen that don't change. 3D games typically have lots of stuff changing. This one does not. And I don't know if this is a 3D game. It's possible it is. The whole point, though, is that while this is a 2D game, I am running it with HDR, and I want to show you what the settings would have looked like if I was using my own. This is what they would have looked like with my old settings. Even bumping the contrast here, it just doesn't look good. I feel like some darkness is missing from over here. So if you look at the SDR, it almost looks a little bit better, because this area is just darker. And let me show you the difference between this and mine. This is the perceptual boost feature that's part of the default settings for HDR. So if you want to do HDR today with Special K, you would open this, you'd click here, you'd click the HDR setup, it would bring this open, you'd check that little box right there, it would turn on HDR. Now in this game, you have to have HDR turn on before you start the game, or else it won't work. Other games, it will turn it on for you, so you don't have to worry about that. But these are the new defaults right here, and then these are the defaults I used to have. So in a 2D game, my old defaults really don't look good. In a 3D game, they still look really good, but they don't look as good as this perceptual boost feature that they added, which allows you to take an SDR game like this and make it look really good with HDR. And I think this would be better than Windows 11's Auto HDR. Now, I don't even think Auto HDR supports this game. Now, I don't know why or what's going on there, but even if it did, I don't think the colors would be right. I think it would look something more like this, where all the colors are wrong and it just looks kind of overbrightened, because there was a 2D elements in a different game I was playing looked very similar to that when upscaled from SDR. But this is Special K, and Special K in DirectX 11 mode has actual hooks into the game engine to get these 16-bit color values and then tone map them down to 10-bit color values within your monitor specifications that you've defined in Special K. So in here, I've defined my display profiles capabilities as 1770, and that's how that looks. Now, I don't know how I've set up OBS. I'm pretty sure I set it up as 10,000 nits, so that if the game can do more, it will do it. But this is what my monitor is set up as, and Windows is set up as this too, because I did some kind of display calibration. I got this number, and so I cannot see any difference between these checkerboard boxes, but you might see those boxes. I can't on my display. It's just extremely bright white, which is weird because when I went to Rtings to measure it, it showed up as, and on there as 760 nits peak brightness. So I don't know what they're measuring because my results are different. So it's possible they had a different model. I'm not sure. The peak brightness is very bright on this monitor when I'm using it, and it looks amazing when you're playing games like this. The colors are so much better than in SDR, where they seem very dull, kind of like gross. This is much better. I don't know if this is the creator's intent or not, because a 2D game is a little bit different. You might not be reaching the creator's intent, but I wanted to show you an example of what a game would look like with colors. Oh, this is a good one. So if you haven't seen the game again, I'm going to spoil it for you. But here's some colors. Like, these really pop. As you can see, I figured out how to paint after one of them. This one I did not know how to paint. Oh my god. If you played the game, you know what I'm talking about. Oh, it took me a while to figure it out. I just cheated on this one. I was like, I don't know. I'm trying to make it look like this. I just sprayed it everywhere. Okay, so the colors really pop though in HDR, and let's look at the difference of this versus SDR. It's just not as bright. It looks good, it's just not as bright. You're missing some of it. And we can take a photo of this. You open up the Xbox game bar by hitting Windows key G, and that will open it as long as you have it enabled. But I want to take a screenshot of this to show you what's in HDR versus SDR. Alright, so we're looking at the menu here, and I want to show you what's in HDR color space. So if you look here, I dimmed everything that's not HDR, and you can see it looks almost identical, which means most of this image is in HDR. It's much brighter, especially this text down here looks so much better. And then if you can see here, anything in blue and green is SDR. The yellow is pretty much the top of the SDR space, and then everything orange is really where you're getting HDR, and that's why this is all showing up like this. So you can see here the ground is not HDR, and if we switch to the SDR as grayscale, it's gray there now. Normally it would be colored. It's actually a slight gray, but it's completely gray here because I removed the color from it. But you can see that his shield and his face and everything have light coming on them, and so they're represented with kind of like orange and green and brighter colors essentially. So you're getting a lot of bright colors when you use this. Now in this mode here, you can see we're getting a lot more of it in the SDR space, but you can see these lines here are in the HDR space, so they'll really pop all these little pieces of orange here. On this armor, you can see the things that need to be bright are bright, like the beam saber and these jetpacks. And again, I'll show you the normal and the grayscale. You can see the difference here. This white is obviously in the HDR range. And then if we go to luminance heat map, you can see what is bright, and that's really good. It looks very, very good to me. Now, there's no accuracy here because this is a 2D game, potentially 2D game. I'm not exactly sure. It looks 2D, and the game uses, it's not like this is pixel art, right? There's not an actual photograph I'm looking at of a model here, but it looks really good. And so this is an example of how you can do HDR in a 2D game and have it look really freaking good. It looks really good to me. Better than the old way that I would have done it with the perceptual boost feature in Special K. And I don't know if Windows Auto HDR works in this game. I've never run it with that, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't. But the fact that Special K adds it is very nice. Now, on my TV, it doesn't look so good. Like, it looks good in HDR. I'm just saying, with the automatic brightness limiter, it kind of sucks. I'd prefer to play this on my desktop on an LCD, where that won't kick in. Now, if I had a desktop OLED, it would also be fine. But I don't know. It's just on the TV itself, it has that brightness limiter. It's meant for a different kind of user, and it's not meant for desktop use on a monitor like this. In my opinion, it would destroy the screen without that brightness limiter. So you need a big heatsink or something if it was a monitor to be able to keep that brightness in HDR mode. What'd you think? Did you like HDR? Did you like what it looked like with a 2D game? Because I don't play this game without HDR anymore. I can't stand it. It looks so freaking good with HDR, and it's this experience where everything is just brighter, but there's more color, there's more contrast. When I put it on my TV, everything really pops. There's a lot of good stuff with using a tool like Special K to essentially get new life out of older games, but you can also use it to get new life out of newer games like Last Call BBS. While it's done in an older style, it's still a brand new game as of this video's production, because it's not going to be brand new maybe by the time you watch this video. But you can also use it on brand new games that don't support HDR. I've got plenty of indie titles that I love to play, but they don't support HDR. But when you do enable Special K with Perceptual Boost in those games, you get a completely different visual experience. To me, adding HDR to games like this is the future. I always use Special K. If I can get it in a game, I will use it. Now, older DirectX 9 titles doesn't support that right now, but there is some support for Vulkan, but it's not 100%. And there are some ways to convert Vulkan DirectX 12 to DirectX 11 and get that working with Special K. So there's some places where it's not going to be usable, but in a lot of games that are newer that support these newer APIs like Vulkan, you can just enable HDR in the game. It's indie titles like this that don't have native support for HDR where it really comes in handy to add in HDR with a tool like Special K. That's where I really like to use this. So I hope you had a good time watching. If you like this, go ahead and subscribe and like the video because I got more coming. Thank you. Goodbye.